The Travels and Adventures of Little Baron Trump and His Wonderful Dog, Bulger. Chapter 3. At this point, my hand trembles and the ink flows unsteadily from my pen. I am about to record certain events which I feel assured the reader will agree with me in considering to be the most interesting of my strange and varied life. Possibly I should say interesting to me, for, gentle reader, one of these certain events above referred to is a no less important occurrence than my birth into this grand and beautiful world, a world which has proven to be full of wonderful things and of more wonderful beings, as you shall see as I go on with my story. I was born in midsummer. It was the night season. 10,000 stars twinkled over the cradle of that wretched little helpless lump of clay, but brighter than all, like a crimson torch flaming in the skies, Cirrus, the dog, down upon me. My father looked up at the heavens and, smiling, murmured, "Little stranger, thou shalt ever be a lover of dogs. Thy smile shall be joy to them, thy words music, and in some four-footed beast of their race shalt thou find thy best, thy faithfulest, thy truest friend." As if to set the very stamp of truth upon my father's words, at that very instant, a cry of a mother dog was heard in an adjoining room, and out of the royal household, Chula'a came running into my presence with a basket of tiny puppies. My father laughingly seized the wicker cradle of this newly arrived family, and holding it up to me, cried out, "Choose, little baron, choose thee a friend and companion." I put out my tiny baby hand, and it rested upon one with a particularly large head. "Ha ha!" laughed my father. "Thou hast well chosen, little baron. For him thou hast chosen hath so much brain that his head doth fairly bulge with it." And when my infant tongue came to wrestle with that word, it was twisted into Bulger. And thus it was that Bulger and I started out on life's journey at almost the same moment. Upon the following day, my father made discovery that waters had begun to recede in the night, and as he looked down from our lofty dwelling, he saw that it now stood apparently in the center of quite an extensive island. After breakfast, in accordance with the custom of the country, my father put on a pair of King Chuchulo's wooden shoes, which were worn by all the melodious sneezers when attempting to move about on the surface of the soft mud occasioned by the inundation. These wooden shoes are extremely light, although quite as long and as broad as snowshoes. The soles being polished, the wearer is enabled to glide over the mud, which, from the nature of the soil, is very oily, with the same rapidity as a runner upon snowshoes. After an excursion of several hours uphill and down dale, my father returned with this piece of strange intelligence, namely, that their habitation had undoubtedly, prior to the falling of the waters, been situated in a lake, but that by degrees, as the waters had receded, an island had been formed, which, somewhat later, had been transformed into a peninsula, which in its turn, by a still further sinking of the waters, had been changed into the crown of a mountain with gently sloping sides, so that, as he reported to my mother, to his dying day, it would be impossible for him to say whether his son had been born in a lake, on an island, upon a peninsula, or on a mountain top, a fact which pained him extremely, for like all the members of his family, he took the greatest pride in recording important events with scrupulous exactitude, even to the smallest detail. Unlike most babes who seem content to pass the first half year or so of their lives eating, sleeping, and crying, I, from the very onset, displayed a most astonishing precocity. When only a few weeks old, although I could not talk, yet I had learned to whistle for Bulger, whose development in mind and body seemed to keep even pace with mine, and who passed most of his time looking up into my childish face with an expression which meant only too plainly, Oh, I shall be so glad when that little tongue is unloosened so that you may call me Bulger and bid me do your will. Nor had he long to wait. One thing which at this early period of my life gave me most joy was the sunlight. Within doors I was fretful, peevish, irritable, but once out in the open air my whole nature changed. I drank in the soft, balmy atmosphere with a vigor and satisfaction that delighted my father. My face brightened, my eyes traveled from valley to hill, from mountain top to sky. Into such an ecstasy of pleasure did this sight of the great world throw me that my mother became anxious, lest it presaged some great evil that was to happen unto me. But the stately baron only smiled. Fear nothing, wife. It only means that within that little head dwells a most wonderfully active mind for a child of its months. Whenever Bulger heard his little master crying out in joyful tones at sight of the beautiful world, he was sure to be seized with a fit of violent barking, during which he sprang around about me with the wildest and most extravagant manifestations of sympathy. Without a doubt, there was a wonderful bond of affection between us. To my mother's, I had almost said horror, I one day, while she was walking with me in her arms upon the broad veranda which encircled Chuchulo's palaces, attempted to throw myself from her arms, crying out in German, "Loose, loose! Let me go, let me go!" I was but 2 months old, and the loud and vigorous tones in which I pronounced this first word which I had spoken in my mother's tongue fairly startled her. I had up to that time apparently been more interested in the soft and musical language of my royal nurse, Chula, in which I could make myself understood very easily. About this time, an accident happened to me, which, although it did not bring about, it greatly hastened the release from parently restraint, so ardently desired, both by Bulger and by me, for from my very entrance into this world, something told me that I should be a famous child, not a mere precocious youth who is made use of by his parents at social gatherings to bore people already in poor spirits, by mounting upon chair or table and declaiming verses parrot-like, with a half a dozen woodenly jerky gestures, but a genuine hero, a real traveler, not afraid to brave a tempest, face a wild beast, or bully a barbarous people into doing as he wanted them to do. It was my mother's custom in the cool of the day to sit with me on the broad veranda while she darned my father's stockings, for although of gentle birth, she had been so accustomed when a girl to exercise German thrift in all things that now, even though she had become the wife of a real baron, she could not forego the pleasure of doing things in those good old ways. And thus she saved my father many a pfennig, which the good man bestowed upon the worthy poor, and went down to the grave loaded with their blessings. At such a time it was that a sudden fit of sneezing seized my mother, and to her unspeakable horror, she let me slip from her arms. Down, down I fell, striking in the soft mud, and disappearing from sight. The poor woman dropped to the floor like lead. The stately baron rose to his feet, and the color fled from his manly cheek. But Chuchulo, who fortunately was paying a visit to my father, only smiled. "Unfeeling barbarian!" roared the great baron. "Hast no respect for a father's tears or a mother's anguish? Out upon thee! Would to heaven I had never entered thy domain." Chuchulo spake not a word. Turning, with imperious mien and right royal manner towards a crowd of retainers, he waved his hand. Quicker than thought, the band of melodious sneezers sprang to their wooden shoes. Away, away they darted like black bats on the wing. The baron saw that in his terrible grief he had let his better judgment slip away, and with pallid face and bended head stood supporting the fainting form of his wife. He felt he knew that his presence among the melodious sneezers at this moment would only disconcert them, impede their progress, and possibly so confuse them that all their efforts might be in vain. They, from their childhood, were so accustomed to wear those huge wooden shoes, to move about on the surface of this treacherous mud, that if it were possible for human hands to restore his son to his arms, theirs would do it. And so he spoke a few words of encouragement in my mother's ear and continued to stand like a statue, with his gaze riveted upon the long files of melodious sneezers as they wound around the crest of the mountain to gain the spot where, as they judged, I had disappeared. Armed with their light, broad wooden shovels, their dusky arms rose and fell with a wonderful precision and regularity, keeping time with the musical notes of their sneezing, now soft and low, now breaking out into a wild and galloping measure. Down, down, down. And yet they delved in vain. No sign of me was there to gladden the hearts of my poor, grief-stricken parents. But hark! What is that shrill cry? It is not human. No, for it is Bulger's bark, or rather, it is Bulger's yelp. He had been watching the band of melodious sneezers as their white shovels rose and fell all in vain, with his head thrust through the railing of the veranda. No one was there with mind and heart enough to catch the meaning of that poor yelp. Chuchulo saw that his men were standing, leaning on their shovels, with looks of doubt and hesitation in their eyes. The king was silent. It was the great baron who spoke. "Oh, let them not give o'er. My life, my wealth, my all are thine, good, kind Chuchu." A lid of sneezing cut short his appeal. Again, Bulger's cry was raised, and this time the king heeded it. An attendant saw the royal nod, and hastening to bind broad wooden cups upon the dog's feet, he was turned loose upon the surface of the mud. What is man with his boasted intelligence? They were 10 paces or more distant from the point where I had disappeared. Yelping, barking, and whining by turns, my dear Bulger hurried to the spot where his unerring scent told him that his beloved little master had gone down. Again, the band of melodious sneezers set to work with renewed vigor, their white shovels hashing with strange effect against the inky blackness of the mud. Bulger encouraged them with loud and joyful barkings. Suddenly, a clear, ringing, melodious chew rent the air. They had caught sight of me. With rare foresight for one of my months, I had closed my nostrils with one hand before reaching the mud, and had thus saved my lugs from tilling up. But how useless would have been this precaution had not my faithful Bulger come to my rescue. His joy now knew no bounds. I thought that I had caught a glimpse of a smile on the old baron's tear-stained cheek as his boy was borne to the veranda, more like an animated lump of earth than aught else, for the air had revived me. My eyes were not only wide open, but they were the only clean place on my whole body. Utterly regardless of my filthy condition, my fond mother clasped me convulsively to her breast, and I verily believe that she would have pressed her lips upon my mud-covered head and face had she not seen the baron's broad palm held in suspicious proximity, while her mother's heart was emptying itself out in words. A few basins of warm water, and I was myself again. No, I was never myself again. My bath in the warm mud of La effected a most remarkable change in me. It checked the growth of my body and turned all my strength upwards into my head and brain. In one short month, my head almost doubled in size. My baby face and expression were gone, and ere another moon had filled her horns, I had grown to be a living wonder. Not only was the size of my head something remarkable, but from my eyes beamed an astonishing intelligence. The poor women of La Achula land crouched in front of me as if I were a being from another world, and then, tapping their foreheads, they approached my mother and whispered, "Most gracious Chu La the Great Spirit has made a mistake and put 2 souls in there instead of 1. And then bent their graceful bodies till their foreheads touched my mother's feet and withdrew, going out backwards like the best regulated court ladies, each leveling her finger at me and opening wide her eyes as she disappeared through the door. The whole scene was so grotesque that I burst out into a shout of laughter, upon hearing which the poor creatures tumbled headlong over each other in their mad efforts to get outside of the house, shrieking at the top of their voices, save us, he will bewitch us." "Little baron," said my father in a tone of mock anger, "you should not have frightened the ladies of King Chuchulo's court." "Chupa, chupa, idiots, idiots," I replied, looking up from my slate upon which I was working out an example in arithmetic, for I was very fond of figures. In fact, my father had already taught me addition by showing me how to trade off worthless glass beads for valuable ivory, and division by taking away 90 cents from every dollar I made. Long before I could read or write, I knew the letters of several languages by name, and could spell any word which had no silent letter in it. No one took more delight in my wonderful accomplishments than Bulger. He seemed to know instinctively that his little master was no ordinary being, and respected him accordingly. We now bade adieu to the land of La Achula and the melodious sneezers. King Chuchulo, with a mighty band of retainers, accompanied us to his frontier, making the forests resound with their melodious choo-choo-ing. Standing on the old baron's shoulders, I waved them a last goodbye, to which they answered with a perfect whirlwind of choo-choo-ahs that Bulger fairly howled with delight. Any special honor paid to his master was always a personal matter to him. The elder baron had intended to penetrate still further into the heart of Africa, but the fact is that the continual growth of my mind was so wonderful that it engrossed his attention from morn till night. He endeavored to hide this from me, but all to no purpose. Before I was 2 years old, my brain had grown so heavy that my mother was obliged to sew pieces of lead in the soles of my shoes to keep my right end upwards. And yet, in spite of this precaution, I was often found standing upon my head, working out difficult mathematical problems by making use of my toes, as the Chinese do their counting machines. The first thing which my father did upon reaching home was to take me to a phrenologist in order to have a chart made of my head. The examination lasted a month. At length, upon the completion of the chart, it was found that I possessed 32 distinct bumps. Well-developed ones, too. It was, therefore, at once determined to engage 32 learned tutors, each tutor to have charge of a separate bump and to do his utmost to enlarge it, even if it grew to be a horn. My father was resolved to leave nothing undone in order to develop my mental power to the utmost limit. I said nothing either for or against the scheme. In 1 short year, I had learned all that the 32 tutors could teach me, and what is more, I had taught each one of them 50 things which he had not known before, and which I had learned while traveling in foreign lands with my parents. One fine morning, to the great surprise of my 32 tutors, I discharged the whole of them. The elder baron, at my suggestion, now sent a bill to each tutor for services rendered him by me. Each tutor refused to pay. The elder baron, at my suggestion, now caused legal process to be served upon each one of them. The court, upon hearing my testimony, rendered an opinion which covered 5,000 pages of legal cap paper and required a whole week to read, in which they held that each thing which I had taught to each one of my 32 tutors was so remarkably strange and peculiar that in the eye of the law it was worth at least $100. That made the bill of each tutor about $5,000, or $160,000 in all. The court then adjourned for a year, all 3 judges being so worn out mentally and physically as to need a 12 months rest before taking up any other business. And we'll go on to Chapter 4 in the next video. Please like, subscribe, leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'd love to hear you talk about this book. I love you. As Tigger says, ta-ta for now.